My name is Raphael. I'm co-founder and CEO at Toucan, and I'm really pleased to be sitting here today with Hugh Salway from Gold Standard, Senior Director for Market Development and Partnerships at Gold Standard. And quick story, I was here last year, and I remember in the debrief after the Celo Salon and the ReFi day, at Toucan we were thinking like, what was missing? And clearly, in our opinion, what was missing is that this is still a bubble, and we are not asking the people. There was very little contribution from people outside of that bubble. So I'm pretty excited to have Hugh here today, who will talk a bit about his perspective on ReFi from an organization that has been in the carbon markets for over 30 years, or like since its inception, really. And yeah, maybe Hugh, you want to say a few words about yourself, and then I'm going to kick it off with the first question.
Great. Thank you very much. And it's really good to be here as well. So thanks for having me here. So my name's Hugh Salway. I've been introduced really well there. My background's definitely not in this space. So my background's in government, which is another big part of what we do in Gold Standard as we think about how we can support governments as they're looking to use carbon markets. But we'll talk a bit more about how blockchain, how ReFi has come into our work in the past year or so. And a bit about Gold Standard. I think some of you will know our work well already. We're a non-profit organization which acts as one of the certifiers in the carbon market. So if you buy carbon credits, some of them may be issued by us as Gold Standard to projects which use our standard, which achieved verified emission reductions and also promote action towards sustainable development goals. And as you said, we've been around for 20 years. We were set up by WWF and other NGOs to try to raise the bar in the market for environmental integrity, but also sustainable development and local ownership of projects.
Awesome, thank you. So in the spirit of a little bit, going back to the beginning of ReFi, whoever knows when it started, but like clearly, I think the month of October of 2021 was a bit of an inception point. What was your reaction when you, what happened within Gold Standard when you heard about these over 20 million carbon credits being tokenized? Luckily not from your standard. So yeah, I'm just curious, what was it like internally, and also what did you hear from other players in the market? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, there was a bit of relief that this was happening to Vera, and it was their problem rather than ours, which was definitely part of our reaction initially.
You're welcome.
And then I mean, my sense is that, there were some who were kind of on top of this straight away, kind of saw an opportunity in the traditional market, and they went for it. A lot of market players, I think, ignored it for a while and actually ignored the scale of what was happening, partly because it felt like it was not within the narrative of what was going on in the market right there, which was about kind of scaling, professionalizing, and a very different route to what was happening with the Klima project. And I think we really didn't have, and to be honest, we still don't really have the kind of full capacity to really understand what was happening well. And so that was kind of one of the first steps that we took, was really trying to get it.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that a lot. For those who don't know, so Gold Standard launched a pilot on working with different players from the ReFi space to develop a framework for how tokenization can happen the good way. And we don't know yet what that means. And so, Hugh, what drove that decision to be like, okay, well, we still want to dig a little bit deeper. We want to open ourselves up to the potential, opportunities that come with that new technology. So maybe, let us give us a view into your thought process there, and what drove that decision, and what are you excited about, and what are you maybe less excited about or fearful of?
I mean, so it's interesting on this. So actually, going back about 5 years, Gold Standard was part of an initiative called the Climate Ledger Initiative, which was looking at the role which blockchain could play in the carbon market. But it was in quite a theoretical way, and it sort of didn't bring to life what could happen in the way that we saw about a year and a half ago now. And so there's always been an openness to blockchain and to new technology within Gold Standard. But it did feel kind of back about a year and a half ago like on both sides, like there was a kind of sense of a new and an old market, and we are one of the legacy standards, and I mean, but the first thing that we did, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is we tried to understand what was happening, and so we engaged, we tried to understand the model. I think it's the same for anyone accessing the carbon market. There's a whole suite of language which you have to get past, and then you realize actually this is essentially, in some ways, the same as what we see elsewhere already. And I think that was what was quite helpful, really. And that's kind of what brought us to a point where we are looking actively now and kind of hopefully soon will introduce a framework for creating assets on chain, digital assets on chain, because a lot of the models are pretty similar to what you may see elsewhere, but there are also some new innovations which can be interesting and can be helpful to the market. And that's really what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to get beyond some of the hype which we may have seen initially, to understand what's really essentially the same and where are we actually being a bit unfair by saying, no, you can't do this on blockchain, but you can use different technologies. But also, where are the real opportunities for us to go beyond what's possible in the market right now?
And so what are these things that you think are opportunities that are beyond the hype?
I mean, there are some pretty obvious things that you just can't really do if you're working off chain. I mean, one of the big opportunities that we see is when you think about who uses the carbon market right now, in a lot of cases, it's big companies who are looking to offset their emissions. And you don't really have much retail access to the market. But there's huge opportunities which you can get through blockchain to fractionalize carbon credits, to link them to payments, for instance, and to kind of realize a whole market of people who are very kind of conscious of their environmental footprint, but I think they were saying this in the panel earlier, don't have access to carbon credits right now because it's very difficult to know how you can buy carbon credits. There's not many transactions you have which amount to a ton of CO2. And so the ability to fractionalize and to create proper tracking there and transparency, I think, is a really important benefit, which is much harder to do elsewhere. We also see really big opportunities in pre-financing of projects as well. So how through kind of some of the initiatives which you can get on blockchain, how can you pool in finance to fund projects earlier on, which is when projects often really need that money, and when it's much harder to get it, in particular if you're a smaller project.
Yeah, I share that. And what are the things that you look out, like the dangers in the woods that you were like, oh, like that's a bullet that we try to dodge? You said like you were happy that it happened initially on another standard. So what are the things you don't want to happen when ReFi opens up again?
No, I mean, it's really interesting. So, I mean, you were mentioning this earlier. What we've been doing for the last, so since about this time last year, we set up a working group where we were bringing together project developers, those who are creating initiatives, running companies in Web3 and others, to look at what are the opportunities through blockchain. And over the last 6 months, we've been having more focused conversations with a few organizations, including Toucan, around what does a framework look like for how you can actually integrate with our registry. And the big main message which has come through from that is organizations are really worried about others screwing up. And so it's actually the organizations who are looking to build kind of proper, sustainable, long-term initiatives, businesses on blockchain who are most worried about some of the stuff which could go wrong elsewhere and could screw things up. And it's a big decentralized world, and that creates some risk. And so I think, and this is partly a real risk, it's partly a perception risk. So I've spent the last year trying to understand as well as I can what's happening and try to understand the fact that when you say blockchain, you don't necessarily straight away mean a speculative cryptocurrency where people can lose money. But actually, when I'm speaking to others in the organization and some of our stakeholders, that's how they see this. And so that for us is, I think, the big risk, partly the perception risk that we're seen as doing something completely stupid by enabling blockchain, but also how could this go wrong?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you said it or if I heard it somewhere else, but like the biggest currency that you have is reputation at the end of the day as a standard, right? That's something you've built up over many years. And the crypto space, which, as you said, crypto, blockchain, sometimes it gets mixed up, also has been struggling with reputational issues since its inception, really. It's interesting because I do see the carbon and the crypto markets as actually quite similar. There's a lot of similarities between both markets because they're both still relatively small markets, relatively young markets, with both inflated expectations a bit, because we all know, oh my God, like if we want to address climate change in time, we need a functioning carbon market, but we're not there yet. And so I think that's what creates some mini bubbles in the carbon markets, and I think the same is true for crypto, where we have these extreme cycles that come from the fact that people have all these expectations of where we can go, but obviously building takes time for everybody who's been doing it. So yeah, I do see a lot of similarities between both markets, and I'm pretty happy that they're coming closer together.
And I mean, I remember one of the first conversations we had was with an organization, I haven't come across them since, from the ReFi space. And about a kind of 5 minutes into the conversation, the guy said, well, you know that the carbon market's perceived a bit as the Wild West. And I could very easily 5 minutes later come back and say, well, Web3 is considered the Wild West.
That's so true, right?
And there are a lot of similarities. Definitely, yeah. I agree with that completely.
Yeah, we have the carbon cowboys and the crypto cowboys and the crypto punks as well. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. So let's play a little game. It's 2025. And you look back on your decision as gold standard to open up for tokenization at the end of 2023, hypothetically. What would you be looking for? Like, what would success look like for you if you, if you think ahead 2 years?
So firstly, I won't have lost my job for completely tarnishing the organization's reputation. But if we go beyond that, I mean, I think two things. I think firstly, that we will, we don't care that much in this about kind of there being a great new market for gold standard credits. Clearly we do, because we care about our project developers, but we're a non-profit. We care more about integrity and scale going together rather than just, okay, let's find a great, fantastic opportunity. But what I do hope that we would see is some real innovation that we don't currently have in the market. So some of the examples I was saying earlier, and maybe some things we're not thinking about now, but you've got some really innovative ways in which finance is going to projects, or there's kind of real incentive mechanisms which are put in place which kind of steer people to deliver projects which are really beneficial for the world. So kind of firstly, having some of those really great examples of innovation. And then secondly, and I think this was a point which was raised earlier on the last panel as well, that we're not talking about blockchain as if it's something different, it's just integrated into the market. And really, if you go beyond 2025 and look out to 2035, I really feel like it should be. We're already seeing examples of this. The Climate Warehouse, which is a big kind of World Bank started meta registries built on blockchain. There are other kind of elements of the market which are coming in, which are built on blockchain. And I think it should just be understood as the norm and a technology which is the basis, rather than it being something which is new and potentially worrying.
Yeah. Wow, I couldn't share that. But like, I fully agree. I think that's exactly what the opportunity that we have in front of us, right, is to leapfrog from, I don't want to be hurtful, but like a bit of a Web 1 type of carbon market, and gold standard definitely being on the more modern end of that spectrum. But like, I think just the way the market works is still picking up the phone and asking about the prices, to directly to a Web 3 native infrastructure as a backbone for environmental markets. So yeah, and I do think, just from like Toucan's perspective, it also, with the way that we look at it, is I like this innovation that we are not yet thinking about. That's, I think, also a core belief behind how we look at the market as like just as a facilitator for other people to build on top and come up with ideas that we have, we couldn't even imagine, that are now suddenly possible. And I think this is a lot that's very much the Web3 ethos, is like this composable nature of, putting things together and like having new things come out on the other side that we couldn't have imagined 2 years ago or 1 year ago. So great. I think we have covered the tokenization question quite a bit, and we'll open it up for questions. So if you have more specifics, but more broadly speaking, if you look at the carbon market today, what are the things that are keeping you up at night, and that you think the market really needs to evolve on or will evolve into?
Yeah, I mean, so The big one right now, and this is partly because of my background, so my background in government, but it's also just a reality, I think, of the market right now, is what regulation will do to the carbon market over the coming years. And I think if you speak to most people in the carbon market, and I guess it's probably the same for blockchain as well, for Web3, like regulation is seen as something which can be positive, but it really depends on how it's done.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing in the market right now. There's been a growing number of countries, in particular in Africa, but also elsewhere, which are looking at how they can make the most of assets which exist within their country. And if you look at that from the perspective of the government, they see international investors for a long time have come in, they've taken all the money out of the country, and there haven't been benefits for local people. And we want to make sure that our local people have those benefits and the government gets benefits as well. And that, I think, most project developers really like and would support. But there are examples where that's kind of going wrong. And so Zimbabwe is one of the examples which has taken up a lot of our time in the last few weeks, where the government has imposed a 50% tax on carbon credits, plus 30% going to, or 20% I think, going to local communities. And this is something which is coming in pretty much overnight. And that's really negative for, well, you take a step back, I'm not sure if they charge oil and gas at the same level as they're charging carbon. And so we have some perverse things which we can see happening in the carbon market right now. And so this is one of the big challenges I think we see going forward is how does a pretty much unregulated carbon market go to one which is regulated for the better, but not get completely tangled in different and often negative regulations across the world?
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think our host here, Celo, actually has a lot of potential solutions to actually distribute the flow of money to local communities in a transparent way, and potentially more like trying to find that balance between the fair amount that goes to the local communities for the right reasons. And is there anything on like gold standards roadmap that you're particularly excited about that you want to share with the audience today? Like not just technological, but like new methodologies that are in the works, or something that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, so we may seem slow on tokenization, but we're incredibly busy as an organization right now across different things. And so part of that is around new methodologies. So, and it's an interesting thing in the carbon market. So for anyone who's kind of come to it more recently, you kind of look into the carbon market and it seems like it's stuck in Web 1, it's not where it needs to be. But if you go back 4 years, Gold Standard and other standards and other organizations barely had money to pay the payroll because this was a very small market. And we've seen a surge in the last few years of investment. And so you go back 4 years, we didn't really introduce new methodologies. We didn't have the money to digitize. And we're able to do all these things now to bring it from a market which kind of really is from the kind of early noughties through to one which is much more sophisticated. And so there's a lot of new methodologies which we're bringing through in different areas right now. So in removals, in agriculture, in different sectors. And we're also about to move into a big stage of investment into digitization. So how we can digitize the process of running a project through Gold Standard, looking at digital MRV, looking at how you can enable integration into the registry, which isn't possible now. So I think the Gold Standard of 2025 will look very different to the Gold Standard of 2023.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like from what I've seen, yeah, I mean, you've been still more like faster moving than the average, I would say. Cool. Last question before we go into the audience questions. If you're a new builder coming into the space, into the ReFi space, what would you give them, like, as a welcome message, or like anything to like, address new builders in a space where you're like, hey, I want you to know that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to learn from history, and just going back to kind of the first example which we saw, so the kind of Klima experiment. So there's a lot that you can learn from that. You can learn, firstly, there's ways in which you can do stuff which will be perceived very negatively and may not have the effect which you wanted. So you may kind of end up creating or kind of stimulating zombie credits which weren't otherwise there. But also look at it and say, okay, there's a huge incentive mechanism which you can get from the Web3 space. And there's kind of huge power which exists there. And so learn from history there, but also learn from the history of what exists in the market. One of the reasons why those in the carbon market are very worried about this space is because some of the real mistrust which has come from carbon markets in the past are because of mis-selling 10 years ago of credits to pensioners and others who were told this is a great investment strategy. And clearly they were being misled. And so that's one of the big worries which sits behind lots of people in the market at a point where last year at least, it felt like things could really take off. There was this kind of big risk which came from nowhere and caught people by surprise. And so I think learn from the history of the market to understand why people perceive things in the way they do.
Yeah, that was a big aha moment for me when I was like, when I connected like what you just said, like basically the carbon cowboy, like the carbon cowboy part where like a lot of retail people lost a lot of money and have been yeah, made to believe that this was a good investment, and then also like the translation or like, you know, like the fear of that happening again with the retail access to carbon markets through an unregulated Web3 interaction. So that was like, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Great, thank you so much. We're gonna open it up to the audience. We have microphones to pass around. I think Frederick, if you scream, maybe you're gonna get it. You're gonna get a microphone.
So thanks a lot for the moderation. And so there are a lot of projects out there who are going through certification, and I know there's a huge backlog. On the one side, you have different type of nature-based projects. Every project has its own complexity. And obviously, it's very frustrating, not only for the project developer, but also for the corporate buyer who wants to invest, right? The question is, what is a proposed solution, you know, to accelerate? Because it feels like it's almost like a monopolistic situation if you only take, you know, obviously there are multiple methodologies out there, but the biggest ones are the most reputational ones are Gold Standard and Vera, right? Is, let's say, a decentralized system one way of looking into this? Or what could Vera do or Gold Standard do as an industry to accelerate the certification so more money can flow into the projects quicker?
No, it's a really good question. And I mean, just to start on this time last year, this was the kind of absolute biggest worry that we had was delays in the system. And steps have been taken since then. So for those who don't know the intricacies of our system, Gold Standard sets the rules for our standard. We have a body called Sustained Cert, which certifies projects against them. And there was a huge backlog last year. If you look at issuances under our standard, they're, I think, kind of 150% higher at this point than they were last year, which is partly because of growth, but it's partly because things are getting better and we're speeding up. We're kind of getting through that backlog. We're able to certify kind of quicker than we were last year. So things are getting better, but the issue's not completely solved. And so kind of short term, what we did last year was hire more staff within Sustained Certs, look at ways in which our processes can be simplified to make it smoother to go through certification. Medium term, we're looking at how and whether more optionality can be brought in. So there are different routes for certification in a way which kind of addresses some of those problems. And then longer term, the solution is digitization. And when I say longer term, I'm not talking 10 years, I'm talking hopefully much shorter than that. And how a lot of the elements which are currently manual and it's kind of sending PDFs back and forth, how that can be streamlined and made much more efficient than it is right now.
Hey, I know that you had mentioned that you work with a lot of organizations in helping develop like long-term sustainable goals and such with them, but I'm curious, what does Gold Standard do to help deter or decentivize some organizations that come in and they just want to throw money down to just buy offsets and participate in the space? Because I'm sure like companies like Nestle, Royal Bank of Canada, these big guys that are making huge climate, well, actually having a huge determinant on our climate in general, like how do you stop them from being able to just come in and buy and just say, yes, I've gotten carbon credits? And just, do you think that this is something we should put more of a focus on with or without blockchain?
So it's a really interesting question. It's one that we've reflected on a lot. So when we were set up in the first place, we had a great focus on kind of certifying the highest levels of impact of projects, but maybe not so much of a focus on who was actually buying them and what was happening there. And it's this big question now for standards about kind of what position do you take on who's actually buying your credits, and is it for you to really take that position? And we've been doing quite a lot of work with ourselves, but also with initiatives kind of in the market. There's one called the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, which is looking at, okay, what does it mean to be a kind of responsible user of carbon credits? And actually, there's a lot which governments are doing here as well. And we engage with governments as well around what disclosure practices should you require of companies, what guidance should you put in place to make sure that companies aren't just purchasing credits and greenwashing. And there's work which we've done on that. And we had a really interesting case a few years ago where, actually last year, there was a coal, for anyone who's from the UK, there's a coal mine in Cumbria, which is kind of in the northwest of the country. There's a potential new coal mine which is due to be built. And we got embroiled in that in a bit because they said that it's fine because the coal mine will be carbon neutral because of use of gold standard credits. And that was a case where we did go further than we kind of typically would, and we supported Friends of the Earth in a kind of legal case which they had to just debunk the fact that you can't build new coal mines, say it's carbon neutral, and that's fine. And so a line was definitely drawn there. But there's work which we try to do kind of alongside our typical work as a certifier.
Thank you. Unfortunately, one more question. That's enough.
I'll make it quick. So I work for a regulated DeFi platform. We're actually working with some of the larger trading houses in the UK to bring inventory onto the platform. I wonder if you have a view on how we bring credible buy-side players to that table, because it feels like the reg is there, the tech is there. How do we make sure, kind of building on your question, how do we build the right ecosystem of players within that can then make full advantage of what we're trying to bring to this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have, you can have your own criteria around this. You can have your own criteria for who's allowed to join the platform, whatever it is that you have. And so there's a standard in the UK which is just starting up called Wilder Carbon, and they don't let anyone buy their credits unless they have a science-based target. And so you're not allowed access until you have that. And it may not be that it's that, but it may be there are other things which you can introduce which would kind of set the bar in a certain place so that you do kind of draw in the ones that you want to have there. So I think there are things that you can do like that. I mean, you often find, not always, that if you have the right values and principles, then you attract the organizations that you want to attract. And so I don't actually know this. I wonder if we do have as many oil majors who are buying gold standard credits as are buying credits elsewhere. I don't know that we do. The companies who we speak to who are buying our credits typically aren't in that space. They are kind of companies who are trying to do the right thing, trying to do it with integrity, and that's why they're looking for gold standard credits as ones which may be more expensive but represent something which they consider to be more sustainable.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for taking the time and coming down here into the basement.
Thank you, Raph, and thank you, Hugh.